Hello, friends. On this glorious day in drink history, we are talking bar equipment with the very talented and inspired Adam Lantheaume of the Boston Shaker Barware Shop, which is appropriately located in the fine city of Boston. Mr. Lantheaume is a cocktail enthusiast whose enthusiasm got a bit out of control in the best way possible, leading him to open a curated barware shop that proudly proclaims to not carry everything, but rather carry all the right things. This curated approach rooted in experience and education makes this a worthwhile destination for any cocktail lover visiting Boston. And for those simply wanting to learn more about the whimsical world of bar tools, sit back and enjoy because we're about to go down the barware rabbit hole. Let's do this. This episode of the Educational Drinking Show is sponsored by Luxardo. You all know and love Luxardo for their legendary maraschino liqueur and maraschino cherries for garnishing. But did you know that there is so much more to Luxardo than maraschino? That's right, folks. A full range of Luxardo liqueurs is available for your cocktail creativity, including Amaro Habano, Bitter, Aperitivo, my personal favorite, Luxardo Apricot, and the newest offering, Bitter Bianco. Good stuff. And now it is my great pleasure to share with you my interview with Adam Lantheaume.
Let's see, we're a kind of retail and website that sells tools and ingredients and books and magazines, and kind of our focus is to help people make better cocktails and all the information and stuff you need to do so.
I'm guessing that you were a bartender before you did this.
I was not.
You were not?
No. I got started because I got really into cocktails before you could find anything. This is back in probably the early 2000s. Is that about right? Yeah. And you couldn't even find good gear unless you had a restaurant like wholesale account.
Yeah.
You got nothing. And I got really into it. And when I wanted to dabble at home, there was, even on the internet, there was really not much. I was ordering pastry bitters directly from the gift shop of Sazerac because they didn't sell them any other way. And so I wasn't a trained bartender, but I would sit at my favorite bar and I would get a drink, and then I'd ask the bartenders how they made it, and I'd watch them make it, and then I'd go home and try to do it, and I'd totally mess it up, and then I'd go back and try to figure out what I did. And over time, I kind of built those skills, and I found that there were other people doing that too. So you kind of had like your little bar family that you could talk about trying to make stuff at home. But yeah, no formal bartender training. I
just a rabid enthusiast.
Yeah, honestly, the shaker started because I had to solve my own problem, which was how do I I got my first Boston shaker, my first cocktail shaker from the bartender over the bar, because I was like, where do you find those? And they're like, yeah, you can't really get them. They're here, you know what? And so I got my first shaker from Dave Cale, who used to be at the B-Side Lounge, is now opening the Automatic in Cambridge. And I took it home and I was like, how the hell do you make this thing work? And then that took a couple weeks of back and forth because, of course, when you're at a bar, you're drinking. So by the time you're done with your lesson, not much sticks. So you kind of have to do it a couple times.
Why the interest in cocktails to begin with?
Well, I've always preferred spirits over beer or wine. Like even from, when I was getting into drinking, I would drink beer and it'd be fine. It'd be great. But, and wine was always, and honestly for me, still confusing. It feels way bigger than cocktails. I don't know why, but there's just kind of an information wall there. So I would go to spirits, and so I would either drink really bad drinks, or I would drink straight spirits. And for me, there was only so long straight spirits was interesting. I saw other stuff going on, and I was like, okay, well, what is all this about? And I remember I was sitting with a coworker. I used to work in kind of technology corporate world, and he was drinking a Rob Roy. And he's like, oh yeah, it's a Rob Roy. Why don't you get one? And I tried it. I was like, oh, hey, okay, this is good. I didn't really realize that people were really doing that, or this is what cocktails were. And so the next day I ordered a Manhattan, and a Manhattan was like the freaking shoe-in, because I was a bourbon drinker. And that was it. And then it was just kind of dabbling into all, and then you have the history, and then you have the culinary. Like there's a whole world in the world of cocktails. So I just kind of went down that road, and had to start finding stuff for myself.
And what were some of those things that were challenging to find early on?
Honestly, everything. I mean, I remember like, okay, I'm into cocktails, so I need cocktail gear. So I went to, stores that I would think would have cocktail gear. Like you go to the big box kitchenware stores, and you go to, I went to every single kind of store I could find, because I didn't have access to restaurant stuff. So I would go to, I don't want to name any names, but any big store that you would buy kitchenware stuff at, and I'd buy the stuff and I'd get it home and it would be bad. Like, I mean, it was, what I learned is designers were designing bar tools so they looked nice, but they weren't necessarily functional. And I wanted things to be functional because I wanted to use them, not just have them sit on a bar cart. So, I started to try to track that stuff down, and that's where the Boston Shaker came over the bar. Then, you're seeing recipes that call for bitters. I mean, you can't find bitters anywhere. I mean, Fee Brothers has been in business for, a couple hundred years now almost. And, but even finding their stuff was tough. Angostura you could find at the grocery store sometimes, but finding orange bitters, I mean, like, forget it. So I started tracking it down. And since I had a technology background, even when the internet was on the younger side, I could find things that other people couldn't. And so I started bringing that in for myself. But shipping was the same for a case of bitters as it was for a bottle of bitters. And so I said, okay, well, why don't I get a case? And then I'll just talk to my friends. But like, hey, anybody want to like just split shipping on this case of bitters? And be like, oh, yeah, that'd be great. And then next thing you know, I had bartenders saying, oh, dude, next time you get that, can you totally get me a couple bottles? I was like, yeah, no worries. And so I got to the point where I was ordering a couple cases of bitters. And then I still remember there was a bar owner, it was Dylan Black. And Dylan, who had just opened the Green Street, or reopened the Green Street, he's like, can you get me a couple cases of those? Because I totally need bitters, and getting them here is a bit of a challenge. I was like, yo, okay. And I knew then, I was like, okay, there's a need not being met, even for the bartenders and the people who do this for a living. And so that's when I started saying, okay, how does all this work, and why can I see this glass at a bar and I can't buy it anywhere? I mean, I buy glassware off bars all the time because they were the right sized, right? You'd go to, some big store and they would have 10, 12, 14 ounce cocktail glasses. And I knew that was way too big. So, you have a 6 ounce cocktail glass at the bar. I'm like, can I get some of those? They're like, yeah, sure. Because the bars are like, they blow through glassware all the time. So that just started building. And then next thing I knew, I had bitters and glassware, and Imbibe was, I think, just getting started. I think I don't remember what year they started, but it was
2006.
Yeah. Okay. So by the time, because I left my day gig in 2008. So they were probably just getting started then. And then, so again, there's stuff going on out here. And then Mad Men took off. And so all of it, I'd love to say that it was all planned, but it was just, I was
You
just there.
really couldn't have picked a better time in modern human history to develop the enthusiasm when you did.
Yeah. I mean, part of it, which came first, right? Like, did my enthusiasm, was I just kind of riding the wave that was already there? Or, I mean, I think everybody was doing that. All I did was kind of take that step. We were talking about Misty Cockfin earlier, and I remember her looking at me and going, wow, you actually, like, you left the day gig to do this. Like, nobody, they talk about it all the time, but nobody ever really does it. And whether it was a smart move or not, to be told, but I just had to do it. So next thing you know, I'm a cocktail gear retailer.
And you kind of had a ringside seat to see this whole culture come to life in one of the great drinking cities of the United States.
Yeah. I mean, it was a super time to be getting into cocktails, because all this stuff was starting to be uncovered, and people are starting to talk about, like, when was the first time the word cocktail was defined in print, and Tales of the Cocktail was just kind of getting their groove on. They had done a couple small versions, but they were just hitting crowd capacity. And so all of this was happening, and a lot of the people that are kind of current icons in the industry, right? I mean, there was always, there Dale and Robert Hess was there, and Gary Regan, and David Wondrich. They were all, established. They were the people that you were kind of amazed when you got to see them in person. But a lot of the people that now are kind of that crowd for others they were just kind of getting into it. Like they were starting to do their thing, and that was just so exciting to kind of, like you said, like a ringside seat, just kind of be there.
Man. So you have this interest, and hearing you talk about it, it almost makes you sound like a drug dealer.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, absolutely. There was there were bitters and things that I got in. Sometimes we had to get spirits over state lines. I had a friend of mine who went home to Jersey all the time, and there were things you could get in New York or Jersey that you couldn't get in Massachusetts. And so when there was enough interest, I'd be like, hey, dude, can you stop by at this liquor store off route, blah, blah, blah. And like, I already bought this case. I called him. I put my credit card in. Like, you just got to put it in your trunk. And he's like, no worries. And he'd bring it back to my big corporate gig. And I walked down the street with like a case of booze. So at times it almost felt like that. But in the beginning, you started finding this little circle of folks who were interested at that level and also didn't have that resource, right? People who would walk in the store in the very beginning, especially, was like, I can't believe all this stuff is right, like here. And Cocktail Kingdom was just getting started. Greg was just doing the books. He hadn't gotten into gear yet, but he was kind of tiptoeing down that line. And it was just a super time to be part of a movement that you kind of knew in your heart was coming, but I mean, you can't really know. And then to be on this other side, be where we are now is kind of crazy.
So you're doing it informally. You see an opportunity to do more. How do you bring it to life and take it to the next level?
You blink, and next thing you know, you're there. I remember it just kind of happened. I was 8 years in at my corporate job. Great company, but it was just kind of like, I don't know what to do next. I was kind of at a wall there. And so I just kind of took the leap. I had, it was the world technology, so I had stock options, all this stuff. And unfortunate story, I had planned and I had bought all this inventory, and I was about to basically sell my stock to pay for the start of the business, right? That's how I was going to fund it. And the stock market crashed. Not even a week. I think it was 4 days before my kind of planned move.
No.
And so I lost over 50% of my startup capital. But I was kind of like, hey, the ball's already started, so let's see how it goes. And I bought myself a little bit of time to say, give it a shot. And if it works, then great. And if not, you'll see what happens next. And I kept on giving myself another 6 months. And that was,
there you go.
Let's see, 2000. So that was 2008, and it's 2016. So 8 years.
What did it look like when you launched?
So when we started, we were actually a store within a store. So there's a store called Grand in Union Square, which unfortunately is no longer. But have you talked about LUPEC, the Ladies United for the Preservation of Endangered Cocktails, yet?
I am a massive fan. We have not talked about it yet on this show, but tell me more.
Well, so the Boston chapter of LUPEC, which was run by Misty Cockevin, was really strong, and they were doing a lot of stuff. And they had done an event at the store called Grand that had a lot of real estate and didn't really fill it out. So I talked to the owners and I said, hey, I'm kind of doing this thing. I'm not really sure where it's going to go. Can I just like rent like a corner of your store? And they're like, yeah, that would be cool. So we kind of worked out this deal that worked for both of us. And they said yes, I think it was the day before Thanksgiving. And so the day after, so Black Friday.
Whoa.
I think I went to IKEA. I bought some shelving, and a buddy of mine set it up overnight. And then that was it. We loaded the shelves with bitters, and social media said, hey, everybody, and nobody knew, that we were around. And so just kind of gradually word got out, and bartenders heard about it, and they would tell their customers about it. So we were this little store, this like 36 square foot like corner. And fortunately I watched, our sales go up, and that was exciting. And one of the highlights was Dale and Jill DeGroff came by, because Dale has family in the Northeast.
Nice.
And they did like an event, like Jill signed her illustrated book, and Dale was there. And that's when I was like, holy cow, like I can't believe, like Dale DeGroff's in my in my store. What is that about? Like,
Whoa.
Yeah, it was crazy. But I got to the point where I needed more room. So hit Craigslist, found a listing, surprisingly enough. I mean, it wasn't nearly that fast, but, and then opened up in 2010 at the location that we're at now.
Wow.
Yeah.
What kind of opportunities did that create, having the new location?
It was great. Like, we opened the door and we got a great response. There were bartenders and friends who would come in that first day. And I remember one thing that started was John Gertzen, who at the time he had just opened Drink, and he came in and said, "I want to buy stuff for the bar. Can I buy stuff for the bar?" And I was like, Yeah, absolutely, totally. And so that kind of started this whole restaurant supply side that wasn't really part of the plan, but just kind of happened. So we do a lot of restaurant supply in Boston and all over the country, as well as industry, like direct. We have an industry discount that we offer anybody who's kind of a professional bartender, so they can kind of get themselves geared up.
No, I have to think earlier on, it was just whatever you could get your hands on. And as you progress, you must have had more options, more connections. How did that all kind of evolve?
Well, what was exciting is, I mean, at the time, like I said, there really wasn't much, right? So Fee Brothers was rocking, like they were established for so long. You had your Peychaud's and Regan's, which both come from Sazerac, and then and Ango, and that was Bitters. And then Bitter Truth was just kind of doing their thing. Bitterman's was kind of dabbling around. Scrappy's was just getting started. So I remember being on cell phone calls with Miles, like, I'm doing this bitters line, and I'm like, totally, I'm all about it. Let's send some over. And Blair Reynolds, who was starting BG Reynolds at the time, who I met at Tales of the Cocktail when they still all had the big writer's house off campus. And he was like, yeah, people tell me to make my syrups. If I make them, like, what do you think? And I was like, yeah, send them over. That sounds great. And so all this was happening. Like, we were all kind of working together, right? Like, they were following their need to create, and I was like, you need a place to, like, you need to access, like, people to be able to access this. And so what was really exciting for me is being able to say, awesome, I can do that. Like, I can do that. Send it over. And we were kind of all working together. And so that was a lot of fun.
It's really interesting because certainly equipment and things of that nature, tools, but more importantly, bitters and syrups and things of that nature, they transcend the limitations of straight up alcohol.
Absolutely.
And it's one of the coolest areas of creativity where you see, if it's a bartender starting their own brand, I mean, it's so overwhelming to start a full-scale distillery.
Yeah.
But in the stuff that you deal in, there's so much creativity and so many less barriers of entry to get into the industry. It must be just so vibrant. You must be able to work with just insanely creative people.
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, it's one of the things that we still kind of struggle with at the Shakers now. There's so much good stuff out there. So in the beginning, it was like finding quality stuff was like a hunt, right? Whether it be there were so many bad books, and part of what I was really focused on is weeding out, books that were just really poorly done and highlighting books, like Dale's books or Gary's books that might be buried at a Barnes and Noble. But I was like, no, everybody, like, these are the books, like the Savoy, and getting all the stuff that Greg was doing, David Embry, and saying, this is what you should be reading. Don't read some of that
Classic staff pick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like a record store.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And which, of course, the more of that stuff that happened, then the more books that the opportunity for people to do. And so same thing with ingredients, and because of the low barrier to entry, what now we're at this point where there's a lot of great stuff out there, right? It used to just be like, most of it really is and it's some big company throwing a label on something and off it goes. But now, I mean, I don't even know how many bitters there actually are in the market.
Many.
It's insane.
So many.
And I wish I could carry them all. Like, I mean, that's one thing. Like, anytime we get something, and there's still stuff that isn't great, right? And that will always be the case. But there's more stuff that's good than there isn't, and that is extremely exciting because that wasn't the case when we got started. So there's all kinds of people dipping their toe. They can kind of start a syrup company or a bitters company. There's obviously more regulations around bitters, which not everybody follows because they think they just throw everything in a bottle and off it goes. But the barrier to entry is pretty low. You can really get started with, just a little commercial kitchen part-time space. And next thing you know, if you have good flavors, it's super. So yeah, so it's and now gear is the next big thing, man. Like really good gear is starting to come out. I mean, Cocktail Kingdom's been doing their stuff, but you have 1224, they're hitting the market. You have the Standard Spoon out in California. I mean, gear used to be this big, like it could only be these huge companies, and now folks are kind of pushing their way through. I know Charles Jolie's got his line coming out, so that's really exciting because I never, not that I never saw it coming, but at the time, I would have never seen boutique, high-end bar gear hitting the mass market, which is awesome.
Are there any pieces of equipment or tools that you sell that just to you, they're works of art, they're classic specimens of what they're supposed to represent, that folks might not be aware of, or what you look for in a great piece of equipment?
Sure, absolutely. So you've kind of a couple categories of tools, right? You have people who are trying to either recreate or replicate classic tools, right? And that's kind of its own whole category. And then you have another category of people who are trying to really innovate the bar tools. And then honestly, my favorite category is kind of right down the middle, where you're kind of taking the best of both. So a lot of the things that I look for is quality of not just the manufacturer, but the design, right? And I've actually done some work with OXO, and they're a big company, but something that they do really well is they look at the actual use of something as much as they can, right? And oftentimes, especially with cocktail gear, they don't really historically had access to people who knew how to tell them what to do, but they can kind of say, okay, this is function for me is the most important. It should look good and it should feel good. It should have a nice character to it. But if it doesn't work well, and if it isn't sturdy is even the wrong word, because it doesn't have to be sturdy. But if it's something that's not quality, it just doesn't make sense to me. Like why bother going through all the effort if it's not going to be something that's like, yeah, like I'm all
totally.
Yeah,
totally.
So sorry.
No, I mean, you're a very important curator. I have to imagine people like you, which there aren't too terribly many, in terms of helping establish those trends and helping give a platform to some of these new creations and tools.
I really like, thank you. I really like that kind of research, that testing. We test everything that comes in the shop.
Really?
Yeah, everything. And the only time, whether we're tasting bitters or syrups or trying tools out, the amount of tools from kind of big kitchenware producers that come in and, you have sales reps, just like in the spirit industry, right? And sales rep comes in like, I have the thing for you. This is perfect. And I'll try it and it will leak. Or, you can't get the top off to get, whoever designed it put the strainer on in a way that you can't really fill it. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work. And I like going through that process and saying, I'm going to make sure that when somebody buys something from me, that it does the job it is intended to do. And one of the best compliments I've ever gotten was from a bar manager who came in and he just went over and grabbed something. And like, it was a decent amount of them, whatever it was.
Yeah. And
I was like, oh no, dude, you can, like if you want to grab one or like grab a sample and try it out on the bar. And he's like, you already did that. Like, I'm good. Like if you went through it, I'll just buy it. And I was like, oh, great. Like, awesome. And that was just like beautiful, right? Because that's what I'm trying to,
that's how it's supposed to be. Yeah. It's like going to a great bar and knowing that you can say, hey, make me something with whiskey, and it's going to be good.
Yep.
Because they have a reputation and a credibility.
Yep. Yeah. And part of what's nice about going to a bar and saying, hey, I'm interested in this quality in a drink, is that they're doing that education and information. They're doing that curation on the fly. And so you can kind of interact with them to figure out what is best for you, because what is best for you isn't necessarily best for everybody. And so that's something that I know I do when I'm on the floor, and I try to have my staff do, is when somebody comes in and says, hey, I need whatever, right? I need a cocktail shaker. Well, depending on what kind of cocktail, how interested are you, right? Because a Boston shaker may or may not be the right tool for someone. I believe often it is, rather than a cobbler. Although cobblers have come a long way, so I can't really knock them as much as I used to. But but part of that's just education. Like, let me show you how to use this, and then this might be the perfect tool for you. Or sometimes, you don't need a $45 bar spoon. Maybe you do. Some people come in and it's like, this is exactly what you need. And to be able to make that connection, to be able to have the communication with the customer and say, let me help solve your problem, whether it's buying a gift for someone who's into cocktails and you're not. That happens all the time, right? People come like, I don't know anything about cocktails, but I'm buying something for my father-in-law, and he's really into it. And we're like, okay, let's start asking you some questions. Like, what kind of drinks does he make when he goes out? What does he order? Have you seen something that looks like this on his bar, right? And then you start kind of building a profile of this person so that you can send them home with something. And then, we get the follow-up like, oh my God, they totally loved it. I'm like, yeah, man,
That's awesome.
That's beautiful. So that's a great thing. And to be able to have kind of good gear and good stuff to fill those voids is kind of what we're about.
You probably get a bunch of gimmicky stuff too.
Oh my God. It still surprises me. And it really, anger is a strong word, but when I see stuff like you go to the trade shows, like the big kitchenware trade shows, or you go to, any big box store, and I'm like, oh, why are they even selling this thing? Like, this thing is just like, I can't believe they make it. And then people buy it. And I'm like, oh, if people only knew that it was really junk. So there's quality junk. And then there's just like, I'm trying to think of some bar tools that just aren't even, they're not solving a problem that needs solving.
I feel like there's a space race for the perfect wine aerator.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And part of it
keeps coming out.
Well, and the thing is, they'll always come out because they're going after a category of customer that doesn't really understand what they're trying to accomplish by aerating wine. So they're looking for that solution, right? And they're not looking for the education of that solution. They're looking to buy this one thing that just solves it. And so there'll always be people coming out with different marketing material and whatever it is to say, here, this solves your problem.
Yeah.
And whether it does or doesn't actually doesn't even matter as much for the companies and the sales. But yeah, I'm trying to think of if there's anything particularly gimmicky, although I hate throwing anybody under the bus, but there's a lot of all-in-ones. There's a lot of all-in-ones. And I'm actually not talking about the bartender. I don't know if you've seen that pocket knife. That's like an entire bar in a pocket knife form. I mean, it's like this big. But I met him, and he knew the store. And he used to live in Boston, and he's like, this isn't for you. He's like, it's a great product. I stand by it. He goes, but it's not for your audience. It's for
that's cool.
a different audience. And I was like, thank you.
Give the awareness.
Yeah, because a lot of people are like, oh, what I make is the best thing ever, and it's for everybody. And that's just not, whether you're talking spirit categories or tools or ingredients or books, it's not. It has a target audience, and find that target audience and do that. That's great. But don't think it's perfect for everybody. And so he makes it, honestly, it's a quality piece of gear. And in a pinch, I'd rather have that than nothing. But we don't sell it because I'm like, I think there's actually better tools. If you're buying bar tools, I have better tools for you.
Let's talk glassware.
Sure.
Glassware is incredible. And I had a moment with glassware recently because Francesco LaFranconi, who does education for Southern in Nevada, he served me a drink, a rocks glass made by Riedel.
Yeah.
And it's thin all the way. So the base is just as thin as the sides. And it was so elegant and so nice and so simple.
Yep.
Glassware. Go.
Well, glassware is a crazy category because there's so much variation. And oftentimes, again, things are just recreations of other things that folks have done. My wife gets really frustrated with me when we go out and if we sit down at the bar. One thing I'm doing, I am looking at every piece of gear and the glass in my hand. I'm looking at it. I'm looking for marks. I'm looking for the weight of the sham and the thickness of the walls and kind of what's the rim look like.
What's a sham?
A sham. So if you have like a double old fashioned or a rocks glass, that bottom part, the thicker it is, it's called so that's called the sham. The stem, like on a stem glass, would be the stem. The sham is kind of the distance between the bottom of the glass and the base.
Noted.
Yeah. And so I'm a big fan of heavy shammed glasses. I like that that was another one, like you couldn't find them out there in the world, but you go to a bar, right, and you get the standard Libby, like heavy sham rocks glass, and you're like, oh man, this just feels like awesome in my hand, but you couldn't find them. So But what's happening now is glassware is kind of, the coupe exploded, right? You couldn't find coupes didn't exist, except for, again, that one Libby glass that everybody was using because that was the only one. But now you have all these different elegant ways of going about it because the quality of materials has improved, right? It's less expensive to do it. You used to have to hand blow anything that wasn't kind of standard or moldable. Somebody would have to make it, and that's very expensive.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about that glass. So that sounds great.
Well, now I can properly say it did not have a.
It did not.
Yeah, it had a sham.
It almost sounds like a like what do they call the stemless wine glasses? Only in a rocks.
It was a rocks glass. It's just it was the same. The glass was very thin all the way. It was almost like a beaker or something, but it was completely elegant.
Yep.
So elegant.
Well, and that's one of the. The glass is the vehicle that you're experiencing the drink through, right? And so whether you go down the Riedel road of there's a shape for every varietal, or not. Some people really push against that. Regardless, what you're holding in your hand is how you're experiencing that drink. Is it heavy? Is it delicate? Are you worried about putting it down? That's what bar tops for me are always a thing.
Oh yeah.
Where it's the glass has to be, I have to feel comfortable putting this down. So either the glass has to be sturdy enough that I can put it on a surface that I'm worried about, or the surface has to kind of be muted, right? Like wood bars are wood for a reason because it kind of, it's a comfortable surface to put your drink down on. So glassware is something I'm always staring at. I'm always looking at the different shapes. I'm always looking at the different styles, the capacities. So that's a whole talk about an education. When I first got into it, trying to understand how glasses were rated for size, right? So you get a glass that's 6 ounces, but if you put 6 ounces in it, it's way too full, and it's well, because 6 ounces is to the rim, which you wouldn't really want to. The waterline was something that nobody was really talking about.
It's so hard.
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in quality glass, but not. We don't carry a lot of the uber high end stuff, not because I'm against it, but because for a lot of people that's just impractical. I want, if you're gonna have for me, cocktails are a easy, comfortable, often shared experience, and so for a lot of folks, having glassware that costs $50 a stem, or that's not very comfortable, right?
No.
You end up in the situation where you're kind of worried about it, and so our market, our customers don't really go for it. They go for stuff that feels really good and looks really good, but is okay to handle, feels comfortable to use.
That's so fascinating. Are there any glassware glasses that you have a particular affinity for, whether it's a category or a general shape that you just think is real pretty?
I'm a big fan of the Nick and Norris.
Yeah.
There's a Nick and Norris that hit the market a while ago, and I remember sending it over to Bon Appetit, and they put it in the magazine for their holiday issue. And I can't believe how many hundreds we sold that. Because you can find them, right? Nick and Norris were gone. So I love Nick and Norris. I'm a big fan of coupes. I don't really use cocktail glasses anymore, and I like the kind of the heavy sham rocks and even double old fashioned. Again, I think you only really need 3 kinds of glasses, right? So I have a buddy of mine who wants 8 of every possible glass, right? Every single shape, and that's great. And I support people who want that, but for me, I'm like, you need a tall glass, you need a down glass, and you need an up glass. And if you have those, you're good. You're covered. You can serve any kind of drink. And in fact, the stem is really for presentation and warmth. You can serve anything that you serve in an up glass and a down glass too, right? If it really came down to it, the only thing you need for the tall glass is volume, and there's effervescence that you got to keep track of, right? Which is why chimneys are built the way they are. But so yeah, I've actually, it's strange. I've become a minimalist when it comes to, what do they call it? They call it like informed simplicity or something like that, where when you're learning about a topic, you start off at simple because you don't really understand it. And then the more you learn about it, you realize the complexity of what's in front of you, and you start absorbing all that information. And then as you work through that, you start going simple again on the other side, because you've internalized that information. You understand what's important to you, what's not important to you, and start saying, this is the piece for me. And so for me, if I get a couple coupes and a couple rocks glasses or double fashions, depending on volume, I'm good.
I have a soft spot for a real elegant, unique cordial glass. Something small and real tall where you can just sip on something. I think it's like just a beautiful.
Yeah,
creation.
it's interesting you say that. One of my favorite glasses that we sell is this small little cordial, or some people call it a sherry glass, although sherry often has a specific shape. That I love for tastes. Right? There's something about when, especially at a bar setting, right, where you want to serve somebody something like, oh, I've never had eau de vie. Oh, really? Okay, great. And you can put it in like a shot. You can put it in a shot glass, but putting it in this little cordial glass that has some delicate pattern to it, it just feels that much more special. And it's one of those glasses. There's a couple glasses that we stock that I will always stock, or as long as I can. Because I love them regardless of how well they sell. We might not sell a ton of them, but I'm like, that shelf space is reserved. And one of them is that cordial glass, because that's the one that when people come over to my house and they're like, oh, can I try a little of, I've never had that. I was like, oh yeah, sure, absolutely. It's like, here's this nice little sample.
So what happens when you hire somebody? What kind of training do they undergo to be able to sell all this fine merchandise?
So it's getting more formal. A lot of it is hands-on training, but one of the things that we're starting to do at the Shaker is really kind of put some edges around that. Fortunately, when people join the Shaker, they're often already interested, right? Whether they're already, we don't only hire people who are interested in cocktails, because you can learn about cocktails. You can't learn how to be a good person and a helpful person and someone who's energetic and enthusiastic. I can teach you everything I think you need to know about cocktails and gear. So we do, we have a lending library. So all of our books, staff takes home, they read through them, they try recipes, they compare notes. We let folks, we have all of our bitters and ingredients open for staff to try, but also for customers to try. So there's a lot of staff will come in and be like, okay, great, try your, let's go through aromatics. Let's try all the aromatics. And so you can understand what's the category about and, why they're different, so that you can talk to customers about it. And then just really understanding, honestly, part of the training is understanding how to ask customers the right questions so that you can understand what their need is. Because that's really hard to do, right? A lot of times, I don't know how many bartenders are out there, make me something that I'll like. Well, what do you like? Well, what do you like? It's like, well, it doesn't matter what I like. I'm trying to make you something, so to start being able to, and at least at a bar, you have ingredient, do you like citrus? So for us, we kind of have this little discovery process of, do you like drinks? Citrus is a key one, right? Because then you're going down shaken or stirred, right? Maybe you'd like a nice mixing glass. If you're like, oh, all I drink are martinis and Manhattans. Great. Then, you don't need to go down the, Japanese cobbler shaker, because the glass is going to be, how about a nice bar spoon? Go down that road. And trying to get people to share information that they don't really even understand themselves yet. They can't tell you that answer. Yeah. So there's a bit of training on there too.
But I have to think your consumers, your customers have been evolving rather quickly as well.
Yeah, you have a couple different categories, right? So when people ask us oftentimes who's your customer? And it's not a demographic. We have retired people in their mid 60s that are bringing cocktail hour back. And we have people in their early 20s that are like, hey, this is cool. And I want to kind of get into it. So it's less of a where they are in their life. It's more of where they are in their exploration of cocktails. And so what's happened over the years is you have more people getting into it, which is exciting. And you also have more people who've pushed that outer boundary, which, only kind of in the beginning, and there was this core group, or this core people who would go to Tales of the Cocktail, right? And there were people who wouldn't even think of it, and now that group has kind of expanded. There are people who are really interested in cocktails, and that circle has gotten much bigger, and the information on the internet and what bars are doing. I mean, I could go to a bar in some rural town, and there might be some really knockout cocktails there because the person there is really interested. I mean, that's all recent. And so our customer base has kind of expanded in what they know and what they want to do, but also more people kind of getting into it. And what is interesting now, I think, is not everyone wants to get into it to be all the way out in the outer ring. Not everybody wants to become an enthusiast. And there's this this window of people who are like, yeah, I like it, and I want to do it right, and I want to make good drinks, but I don't need to do it all the time. And that's a really interesting group of folks. And that group has kind of gotten bigger too, right? You kind of break through that first level. And those folks are, I think, the most fun to talk to because they're not so deep that they're looking for this very, very particular thing, which is, I mean, we talk about that stuff all day long. I'll talk to people all day long about clear ice is like one of the things. I'll talk about clear ice forever. But a lot of people are like, yeah, not really interesting.
Yeah.
Those folks are like, how do I make cocktails kind of part of my everyday without having to become a hardcore enthusiast? And it's like, great, let's have that conversation. Let's expand your interest within the window that you're interested in it.
Do any items come to mind for you that either you didn't see a ton of relevance or functionality and they just sold like wildfire, or you said, man, this is gonna be the next hot thing, and then just no one was interested?
That is a great question. So the first one the first half of that I'll sit for a second. The second one is clear ice. I thought clear ice, and it's coming, a lot of companies are coming out with clear ice, but I thought like 2 years ago when all the bars were all about it, that the home users were like right there. And I think it's cool. But I brought in a bunch of stuff and it just sits, man.
Really?
Yeah. Just like it's, I think when it comes down to it, for people who are, and I don't have a name for that window between, very casual, like we're gonna have a parties full of cocktails besides that now, to, a hardcore enthusiast, that window in between. A lot of folks are like, yeah, it's just not worth the effort. Like I get it, or even if they don't care to get it.
They need to go to Japan.
Yeah, right. I mean, and that's part. I mean, one thing you can really only appreciate clear ice when you've experienced it. I mean, there's just something about.
It almost doesn't even look like there's an ice cube in there.
No, yeah, it's
and then
perfect.
You see it, and it's just like.
And certain people are all about it, but there's a big crowd that are like, regardless of like how well or how it doesn't dilute, and that all the flavorings and everything are out, like there's no impurities in it, like all that stuff is great. But some people are like, okay, I got my ice machine, that's all good. I thought that was really coming. The stuff that kind of took off, there's a lot of and gimmicky is the wrong word, but there's a lot of this like I'm trying to think of a good term for it. I think I'll use syrups as a big category, and it's not that syrups are bad, but like there's a certain faction of syrups that are just there to be there. But people love it, right? I mean, people love like all those different flavors. And when folks buy it, I'm kind of like, great, have fun, that's awesome. And I'm kind of like, what are you gonna do with it? What are you gonna do with 16 ounces of that? Like I can't think of that many drinks that go for it, but they do, man. They plow through it. I'm trying to think. There's definitely other stuff in the shop that we stock that I'm like, okay, great. I mean, it moves. But I'm going to blank on it. If I think of it, I'll bring it back around.
Do you have many customers outside of the U.S.?
No, we used to. So we used to do not a decent, but a small amount of shipping. We used to ship to, and a lot of it were like cocktail bars that were getting started in other countries. But honestly, the customs, every country has their own rules, and there's people and companies and software that will let you manage all that. And one thing I'm learning about being in business, so now we're at this point now where like my business is a business. Like it used to be a hobby that I went, and if I got lucky, I made some money on it. One of the exciting things is like actually treating it like a business. And one of the things we had to do it's like, I mean, that's a whole nother podcast, but I mean, I could talk about kind of the business of running a business, is kind of this new exciting thing, to do. But international shipping was one of the things we just kind of had to say, you know what? We're going to have to put the kibosh. And it's not because we don't want to do it. And it's not because certain things are fine. Like there are certain categories of things that we ship all the time, no problem. But it's always out of band, right? It's always something we have to do different.
Got it.
And that takes people and energy away from the stuff that we do well. And so the other thing that's really been exciting is watching other companies pop up all over the world. So what we do often is we refer. And it's not a formal program, but like there's companies in the UK and Canada, and I'm sure my staff has a long list of people that were like, hey, these are good people, they're doing a good job.
That's cool.
I'd rather send. I like connecting people to what they need, and sometimes we don't have it, whether by choice or because we don't have it. I would rather send someone to get that solved than say, oh, good luck, better luck next time. I mean, the amount of referrals that we do out of our shop, we have a whole page, right, that we keep up the counter of places to go find things that we don't carry, whether it's, herbs to, make your own bitters, or, regular kitchen, like bigger kind of kitchenware, all good liquor stores because we don't have a liquor license. So where to go. And that is as satisfying as handing someone like, this is the spoon for you.
Any thoughts or perspectives on the Boston Shaker itself?
The actual tool, you mean? I still think it's the best gear out there, and part of that is because of that simplicity, right? So you have two very simple halves, right, that let you do a lot of things, and it is so functional that for me the beauty of the function and the honestly clear storage, like it packs up real small and you can put all your tools inside of it. There's a learning curve there. Absolutely. And that one of the reasons we started the store was to help break that down. It took me so long to learn to use a Boston Shaker and be comfortable because I wasn't a bartender. I'd go home and I'd be like, it's going to leak or I'm going to break the glass, like all these concerns. And I still think with a bit of practice, it's a great tool. And you actually get to pick your other tools, which is the other thing that I really like doing. So like a Boston Shaker, whether you're metal on metal or glass on tin, whatever the combo works for you, you get to pick your spoon, you get to pick your strainer, like what feels good in your hand, like all of that stuff. You get to kind of pick all these other pieces and build your own cocktail making kit.
I was going to say arsenal.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And that, I'm a believer in kind of building as you go. I started not that way. I started like I went to the liquor store and dropped $500 because I had to get all the items, right? And when people ask me like, well, what should I do? I'm like, find a cocktail that you like, go buy the ingredients for that drink and get good at that drink. And then you can expand. But that way you don't end up like there were things in my cabinet for years where I'm like, I just don't, I don't drink a lot of cachaça. So it's still there and that's okay. But if I had known that up front that I'm a stirred person, I like stirred cocktails. That's kind of always where I gravitate to on a cocktail menu or in a recipe book. There's certain ingredients that I'm not going to use a whole lot. And I want people to find that out so that their experience in getting into cocktails is good and comfortable, as opposed to sometimes people get intimidated or they're like, wow, that was a real fail. Like, I mean, that's one of the things that I'm still trying to solve is this, like, a lot of people blame themselves for their cocktails not being good. And part of it is that they haven't been educated to the point that they could execute it successfully. The analogy I use all the time is, if you're a good musician and you put any guitar in that person's hand, they can make that guitar sound good because they know how to play music and they can deal with that gear. And I can make a great Manhattan using like a piece of Tupperware and a chopstick and a slotted spoon, and like, because I know what I'm going for. I know what dilution, I'm going for. I know how all that stuff works. The tools help and they make it more enjoyable and they make it easier. A lot of people focus just on the tools or just on the ingredients. And if you have all those beautiful things and you really still don't know what you're doing, the drink's not going to taste good because you haven't diluted enough, or you over diluted it, or you're using the wrong method of combining the ingredients. And so that's something where I think that that still needs to happen for this next. I think the next wave of cocktail interest is when that really hits mainstream, because It's not. We all live in this world where everybody talks about cocktails all the time, and we're at cocktail bars, and we talk to other bartenders, and we talk to other enthusiasts. But there's way more people out there who are still sitting there going, yeah, I just don't make good drinks. It's like, but you could. It's not hard. You just have to know. But they don't know where to look, and so I know.
It's a really cool perspective to have, because almost more than a bartender, you're in a position to empower them to do that and really give them literally the tools to do it.
I love doing that. Like nothing brings me more joy than getting someone to the point where either they thought they didn't like cocktails and it turns out they do, they just never had one that fit their palate, or they like cocktails but they don't think they can do it, and it's because they haven't really put those, there's pieces of information they don't have. So we do classes at the Shaker, and their intro, the one we do the most of is this kind of what I call craft cocktail techniques, and it's base techniques, right? It is how to shake and how to stir and why you do that, and some other kind of, we talk a bit about garnish, we talk a bit about dilution, and everybody, when they come into this, most people say, like, oh, that's the piece, right? We get to some point and you get this person who's like, that's it, right? I wasn't using enough ice, or I didn't do this long enough, or, my vermouth is bad because it's been in my cabinet for 6 years, unrefrigerated. And there's these moments of like, oh, now I can do this. And that for me is crazy exciting. So there's the information, and then there's the gear, to kind of support that. But for me, a lot of it is just that, like, getting that click in someone's head where they're like, oh, I get it now. And now I feel empowered. Now I feel like I can do this. And that's how you get someone into the enthusiasm realm, because now they're like, oh, we broke down that wall, and now the world is my oyster. I can make all kinds of things. I just didn't realize what that piece was.
And where do you take it from here? What are your opportunities, challenges, and inspirations to continue evolving?
One thing I'm really excited about is that knowledge, right? And how to get that out in a usable way. And part of the challenge there is you're talking to people who don't know they need the help yet, right? So, like, how do you set yourself up to be the right resource at the right time in the right place when that moment hits? And so that's definitely a challenge. The other challenge, like I was saying earlier, is there's a lot of really good stuff out there now. And our shop the physical store is small. I mean, we're 600 square feet, not including storage, and that's just our showroom. And in my heart, I want to carry all the good stuff. I want to carry all of it. But that doesn't make sense either, because curation is limiting choice is helpful. If you have a cocktail menu and it's got a billion things on it, for people who don't know what they're looking for, they're just like, it's just not. I'd rather say, no, we're going to pick best of categories and narrow it, but there's so much good stuff. So that's the other thing, is just how do you make those calls? How do you say no between two really good things, right? You look at them and you're like, yeah, they're both great. But I can't do both. So what do you do? So that's kind of another thing that we're facing. And then the next thing is kind of what is kind of the big next? Like the store's doing great, classes are doing great. The industry is changing. You're watching. I mean, when I got started, it was me and like 3 other stores in the country. And I think there was 1 store internationally, I forget what country it was in, that did cocktail stuff. But now they're popping up all over the place, which is awesome, because that's what I wanted. I remember saying, I want to get to the point that you can get bitters everywhere, so I don't have to be the only place, so I can start dabbling into the other stuff. But now that we're here, like, okay, great, now what? So that's part of what we're kind of working on when I talk about the business of the businesses. What do we want to be when we grow up? Now that we're here, what's our next thing? And so it's exciting.
And the website is?
TheBostonShaker.com. So it's TheBostonShaker.com.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you for
my
sharing
pleasure.
your stories and enlightening us on your world. It's very exciting and
Thanks.
A great contribution to the culture. So
I appreciate it.
I'm excited to cross paths again.
Absolutely.
And to the future.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you.